Hey everyone, it's Jen from Midnight Sky Fibers, and this is how you block ruffles for your knitting. So one of the really fun things about knitting is the ability to block and make ruffles in your knitting and have them look really nice. So this is a pattern for a little baby dress or baby jacket that has a bunch of ruffles. You can see that it makes a half circle shape and that it's still a little bit wet so that I can form the ruffles exactly how I want them. You can see that the bottom ones form by themselves since I've also partially already pinched them into place a little bit. But these ones up here, which you can see is much wider than the body portion of it on the top here, needs to be ruffled as well. While it's not hugely critical to block ruffles into place, I think it adds a really nice finishing touch when you're giving hand knits as gifts to make the ruffles look as nicely as possible, especially for things like scarves or things where it can just blocking makes all the difference in turning something that would otherwise look kind of scraggly into something that just looks really beautiful. So the way I lay out my ruffles is that I just start pinching. So in this case, I know that I want them to be fairly small. You know, I don't want any huge pleats because that would look unintentional. So I just carefully start by pinching them into place, and I pinch the smallest ruffles starting first if you have multiple layers. If I were doing something that had only one very ruffled edge, like if this were the only very ruffled edge, I might actually go to the trouble of using blocking wires or some T-pins to keep the other edge straight so that the ruffles really get shown off in the finished product. So this is actually a little bit dry and already blocked into place from how I had it laid out before. This is a superwash wool, so I like to throw it in the dryer a little bit to help make sure it tightens up and that it just looks as nice and fluffy as possible for superwash. Obviously you don't normally want to do that for other yarns, so I'm just going to kind of press this edge flat along here because I want to make sure that this is all lining up. And then I'm going to start, so I'm pretty happy with how these ruffles are going, so I'm going to start doing the ones on the bottom. So the most important part for the bottom ruffles, and even the ones on the edge here, is that your hems line up straight. So I like to adjust it just by pinching it into shape, and it'll stay pretty nicely. And it takes usually a little bit of trial and error. You have to go back and adjust the size of the ruffles, but you can just pinch them into place really carefully as you go along, trying to make them all about the same size. And you can see here that I have just a ton of ruffles here, and if I were to just leave it to dry like this, I'd have some pretty funny lines going on in the finished product, which I don't want when it took me hours to knit something going up. You might also notice in the background here, a little bit hard to see because it blends in, but that I haven't bothered to weave the ends in yet. That's just, normally I'd weave the ends in before blocking. That's just me being lazy. If you're blocking something that has a really lacy edge or a lacy ruffle edge, you'd want to wait until afterwards to block. So here's an example. If you can see how much bigger these ruffles are compared to the ones on either side. So I'd want to go along and pinch, steal some from the one side, go pinch, and just make sure the ruffle is pinched along. I also like to try and line up some of the little ruffles on the bottom with the top. You can see it already does that a little bit naturally from how I had this laid out before. I also really like my ruffles to all go up the full length and not have pieces where there's just half a ruffle piece. I want my ruffles to be full-sized. And then just as I'm going along and finishing up the ruffle pieces, I want to go along and make sure that my front sides are the same length on this. So you just want to go along and make sure that you've done them out to the same length so that it all is going to line up properly in the end, so you don't end up with one end that's really flared out and several inches larger than the other one, and that they both have about the same amount of ruffles. So I have like 5 or 6 here and 5 or 6 here, just so that they're all, making sure they're all the same size and the same amount as we go along. So then that's just going to sit there until it dries, and then once it's dry, the ruffles will stay in place. They'll get a little bit, a little bit looser and floppier, just because of the nature of the superwash wool that I'm using. But the body of the ruffles as a whole will stay in place and look much nicer than if I hadn't bothered to block it at all. In which case, it just looks like a giant spread out mass that's still pretty. It just has more of the look of the A-line coat rather than the ruffle look that I'm going for here.